Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, rather. So I don't want to waste any time because there's so much to talk about with Alex in this story, which is just an amazing piece of narrative journalism about an incredibly interesting subject. So let's just jump into it. Alex, can we just orient people a little bit? Would you just kind of tell us the story of John Allen Chau, who was only 26 when he died, and he was very far from home? Can you just tell people so they kind of click into what we're talking about here? Where did he come from, and how did he die?
John was from Vancouver in Washington State. You may remember him from a sort of flurry of headlines nearly 2 years ago now. Man killed by Stone Age tribe on remote island, basically. John was a Christian missionary who was trying to kind of achieve the Mount Everest of missionary work, which is to contact the Sentinelese who live on a remote island, 2 or 3 hours flight from anywhere off India, and who have a history of repelling violently anybody who tries to contact them, going back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. They're mentioned by Ptolemy and Marco Polo as "do not stop on these islands or you will be killed." So in a way, they are kind of generally considered to be the most isolated people on earth. And for that reason, they are kind of the ultimate goal if you are the kind of guy who sees themselves walking alone into the jungle to meet the uncontacted tribe. And that's what John was trying to do. In fact, it had been his life's mission for well over a decade by the time he died.
Do you remember hearing about his death when the news broke?
Yeah, I did. And I, without even reading the stories, I knew exactly where he was trying to go. I'd been obsessed with these islands myself as a journalist for well over a decade. You know, from 2002 to 2006, I was based in India. One of the first people I met there was an anthropologist who told me about these islands and this extraordinary group of tribes who lived there. Essentially, there are 5 groups on the islands. The islands, there's about 800 islands, only 30 of them are inhabited. 5 of them are inhabited by Black African tribes. They are descendants of the first people who ever walked out of Africa, walked through the Middle East and Europe. There was a chain, or there was a mountain range that used to connect Burma to Indonesia. 10,000 years ago, the ice caps melted, the seas rose, and this mountain range was reduced to little dots in the ocean. And these people have been isolated there ever since. So they're, for anthropologists, they're absolutely extraordinary. These are really the first man living as they were 10,000 years ago. If you're religious, they're Adam and Eve, mm-hmm. and they have this, they've had a fascination actually for outsiders for centuries. The whole subject, the whole school of social anthropology is partly based on a study of these tribes. But yes, for Christian missionaries, they've been the gold standard.
Now, when Mr. Chau died, what kind of coverage did the death get? It was, I remember, quite a sort of a sensationalistic story that broke. I think a lot of people will remember at least reading this headline: this young American missionary killed with arrows in the, somewhere in the Pacific, I think was how most Americans would remember that. What was the coverage like?
It was almost universally condemnatory, really. And the coverage that he received in, I guess, what we kind of quaintly call the mainstream press these days was nothing compared to the actual mainstream press, social media, which was, I mean, pretty horrendous. Hateful, really. He was characterized as a sort of Christian supremacist, as a racist, as someone who was almost deliberately trying to start a genocide because he might have been carrying pathogens that would infect the tribe. You know, some of these arguments have some basis in fact, and you know, there is a sort of consensus really that uncontacted tribes should be allowed to live on their own if they want. I mean, it's more or less centered around a group called Survival International in London that has appointed itself the protector of these tribes. But the vitriol and the, well, pure hate was pretty shocking, considering that John, in this whole, you know, imbroglio, John was the only guy that was harmed, and he died, and his family were in mourning. You know, there was no thought, no humanity, no empathy at all, really.
And for you, I mean, what do you think was pulling you toward wanting to write this story? Well,
I mean, I've been trying to write this story for decades. As I say, I was interested in these tribes. I've been to the islands back and forth a few times. I've been kicked off the islands. They're a border area in India that they're highly militarized and very protected. I even had a fight with a policeman in the street at one point. So, you know, I'd become quite obsessed, but I'd never convinced an editor to run the story on the basis that, you know, as one editor said to me, you know, it's fascinating, but I think this story is 10,000 years old, you know, and we're a newspaper. So poor John gave me a kind of the perfect excuse to unbundle this sort of vast library of stuff that I'd accumulated over the years. But also, I mean, his story kind of absolutely encapsulated the so many of the sort of currents that flow through these islands, the sort of the horrible colonial history, the kind of exoticization of tribes, the displacement of kind of tribes or people's agency. The islands, not only are they home to the tribes, they were, there was a jail built on there where the Brits used to incarcerate Indian freedom fighters and torture them and conduct horrible sort of medical experiments on them. There's a horrible history of foreigners showing up on these islands and behaving really badly. And so a white man walking into the jungle presents a kind of uniquely unfortunate image. And that had been me once, actually. That's what I'd been doing. And I realized actually that not only had John done the same, but that sort of connection or the parallels between what I'd been doing and what he'd been doing kind of allowed me to get over the natural sort of instinct to condemn his actions and to see him much more empathetically and without judgment.